So I'm here at the San Cristobal Municipal Pantheon, the city cemetery. I actually came here several weeks ago just because it was nearby, and I find cemeteries very interesting places, very telling places of how people feel about the living and those who have passed. Now, this is only my second cemetery that I've ever been to in Mexico. Distinctly different from the US, as you can see. And more than that, this place is actually quite different from the one even in Merida. So today is the 27th of October. I actually purposely came here because I was told that nobody really comes here until the 28th. And I wasn't 100% sure if I wanted to be here when everyone was preparing their loved ones and preparing for Dia de los Muertos. And I can tell you that today there are, I don't know, easily 50, 60 people here throughout. Like, they're not congregating, they're throughout. It took me a minute to find a quiet spot where I felt like I could record. They're coming here, they're repainting their loved ones' grave sites, pulling weeds, getting rid of trash. And I was even able to see some people literally digging up the bones of their family members and cleaning those bones. Now, I'm not 100% on the symbolism of all of that, but when they come here to clean, they come here to clean. When I came here the first time, spread out throughout the cemetery, I kept seeing these large basins of water. Some were empty, some were full. And I was really curious about why those were there, couldn't figure it out. I can tell you today, those are all filled with water, and it's because people have come here with buckets and sponges, mops, brooms, like using that water to legitimately just clean down these homes. And it's really kind of a peaceful thing to watch. I tried not to record too much because I'm not sure how sensitive that would be. I know that some of the local population here hates being recorded in general, and so I didn't want to necessarily record somebody during this very private moment. And while I think some of the people that are here are definitely relatives of the grave sites that they're tending to, there's also a sense of community where I feel like people are actually maybe taking care of more than just their family's grave sites. One of the things that kind of shocked me when I came here the first time is the amount of trash that was throughout the cemetery, like just piles and piles. You would see these signs that say, trash is prohibited here, please take it away. Part of why the trash gets here is because this is actually sometimes a place for parties. That's what people do. People come here, they bring their lunch, their dinner, their snacks, and they sit with their loved ones, not just on Dia de los Muertos, but just throughout the year. They sit with their loved ones. That sometimes leads to trash being left behind. Also, one of the things that's very popular in Mexico is to actually bring the favorite dishes, the favorite snacks, the favorite drinks, the favorite toys of the loved ones that have passed. So they put these items onto their grave sites, which of course over time basically turn into trash, right? But this is the season they come by, do kind of a spring cleaning, except in the fall. And so that's the first interesting thing about Dia de los Muertos in Mexico. So let's go over 7 others. In the US, I was always told that Dia de los Muertos is a celebration around the time of Halloween. I always knew it wasn't about Halloween and that it was indigenous to the people who were in Mexico before the Spaniards got here. But that's not entirely true. Yes, the foundation of Dia de los Muertos is definitely from the local indigenous people. A lot of credit is given to the Aztecs, the Toltecs, and the Nahua. I might not be pronouncing that right. And so the Aztecs and the Mesoamerican cultures that originally celebrated what we now call Day of the Dead, I feel like they looked at death as part of the cycle of life, and that death wasn't the end of the cycle. Death was just a passing from this world to the next, and it wasn't so much that people died in a permanent forever concept so much as they went to kind of their next location. And so mourning death was disrespectful because it's the normal path of life. It is inevitable. It's like mourning when your kids turn into teenagers or when your kids get married. It's proper, it's right that this happens. And also there's a sense of community between those who are living and those who have passed. And that the people who have passed are still very much a part of the community. They are remembered, they're cherished, they're in the hearts, and the things that they're known for continue on. If your mother really loved donuts, perhaps every year you might come by and bring those donuts, reviving your memory again and again every year. And so for those of us whose mothers have passed, it's not that our mothers are no longer with us at all. They're still in our hearts, they're still on our mind. My mother passed away almost 3 years ago, and there are still times when I think my mom would love this place, or I can imagine her opinion on certain things, imagine what she might say watching Alex do something. And it's because her memory, her heart, her personality, her soul, parts of it continue to live on in myself as well as my siblings and even our children, but also because death is actually not the end-all be-all. For lack of a better phrase, she's in a better place. And she's still a really important part of my self-identity. She's still a very big part of my life, even though she has passed on. And so our loved ones who have passed on are kept alive and well in our memories and our spirit. And at least once a year, this tradition gives you full permission to remember them, tell stories, to appreciate not only those who have passed, but the ones who are still around us. But here's the thing, the Aztecs and the Mesoamericans didn't just celebrate 1, 2, or even 3 days a year. They celebrated for sometimes over a month. Many think that between July and August, an entire month of memorializing and remembering and celebrating those who have gone before us occurred. So why today is it really only celebrated for a few short days? Well, the answer is that the Spanish came. So as the Spaniards came to conquer the lands, they brought with them really strong Catholic beliefs. And so, as you might know, one of the things that the Spanish, specifically the Catholics, did as they conquered the world is they strongly encouraged everyone to become Catholic. And there were different ways to do this. One of the things that happened was the minimizing of this holiday to line up with the All Saints' Day and All Souls' Day that Catholics already celebrated. And from what I'm understanding, before this merging of the original indigenous beliefs and Catholicism happened, All Saints' Day and All Souls' Day weren't that big of a deal in Europe. And it really was kind of the merging of these two religions that slowly, over time, caused it to become a much bigger deal. And so an entire month worth of celebration has now kind of dwindled down to 2 to 3 days, depending on what part of Mexico we're speaking of, but we'll talk about those details a little bit later. So the Catholic domination of this region was pretty effective. In fact, most people in Mexico consider themselves to be Catholic, and that does include a lot of the indigenous cultures that are here as well as the Mayans over in the Yucatan. And so as you might know, Mexico, before becoming Mexico, this region had multiple tribes, multiple cultures spread throughout. And so as Spain was slowly taking over Mexico and helping the population become Catholic, as you can imagine, different regions kind of acclimated to Catholicism in very different ways. And so Dia de los Muertos is celebrated differently depending on what part of Mexico you are in. There are some fundamental things that at least the majority of Mexico celebrates. Coming in clean. And so at the centerpiece of most people's homes during Dia de los Muertos is the ofrenda, the altar. When I think of altar, I'm thinking worship, I'm thinking sacrifice, I'm thinking a place to ask for prayers to be answered, I'm thinking communication with God. I also think of altars as at least semi-permanent. And so these ofrendas, these altars are temporary. They're only put up during this season. It's a little confusing because of the word altar, I think, and an offering. But instead of being a place of worship, it actually really reminds me of a welcome home banner that you might have for, let's say, a returning service member from deployment. And if you were to celebrate a returning service member from deployment, what type of things might you put on the table? Their favorite foods, their favorite drinks, perhaps some gifts that you know they'll really, really love. I mean, it's kind of what they put on these altars. And so some key elements that you might want to add to your altar would be water, their favorite foods and drinks, especially those that are really rich in scent. While there's zero expectation that your deceased loved ones will actually eat any of the food, there is a huge expectation that the amazing scents will help guide them from the afterlife to wherever the altar is located, usually in your home. Each visiting family member would get their own candle. And of course, their favorite toys or items from when they were living. And so apparently what was really popular back in the day is to literally line the streets from the gravesite all the way to the altar at home so that your loved ones would know exactly which path to go. You would light it with candles, beautiful orange flowers, and of course, specifically flowers that have amazing scents. Incense is also used to kind of purify the air, specifically copal, which one of the mausoleums over in the cemetery today, it looked like they were almost like fumigating the inside of the mausoleum with a green smoke, which I'm kind of assuming might be copal. Let's talk about calaveras, skulls. So there are 4 calavera concepts that I think is super neat. So Cavaleras de azúcar, sugar skulls, and obviously it represents death, but it represents it through sweetness and appreciation. And something you can have done on your Cavaleras de azúcar is you can actually get your loved ones' names written on the forehead, and then of course get a different skull for every member. They also come in a wide variety of sizes. You could have the small ones represent lost children, and then the bigger ones represent perhaps parents and grandparents. And they even have chocolate. Also, the presence of skulls just in general throughout Mexico is a gentle reminder that among us every day are the memories of our loved ones who have passed. And so they are still very much a part of our everyday lives. A really cool concept that I've only recently learned about are calaveritas, or calaveras literarias, essentially literary skulls. And these are usually really sarcastic and witty, almost like a roast, rhyming roast of your friends and loved ones who have not passed away. And so I don't know about you, but when I was in the 7th and again in the 8th grade, because I moved, while we were reading Tom Sawyer, one of the English assignments we had to do was to create our own eulogy, literally pretending that we died, pretending that we are a loved one, reading a eulogy at our funeral. Kind of a morbid task. And so what a lot of us did is we made it humorous. We found creative and funny ways for us to pass, and we tried to make it just like a fun event. And it's kind of what they do here in Mexico. But instead of doing a eulogy for themselves, they're doing a eulogy for friends, loved ones, or politicians, clergymen, and just celebrities. These can be short, it can be long. They always rhyme. They always mention a weakness of the person. If you're roasting somebody you love, you're probably gonna make it a little tongue-in-cheek, you're gonna be a little gentle about it, but basically you're going to mention a weakness that that person has and how that weakness ultimately led to their death. For example, perhaps somebody has a penchant for recording themselves all the time while walking down sidewalks, which are not always smooth, and so perhaps you would say that this person inevitably passes away by stumbling, falling onto the street, and being run over by a car. A Volkswagen Bug, of course. But you would do it with a poem, via rhyming, yeah.
Here lies a traveling YouTuber who's actually kind of a goober. She was recording away about a very special day, tripped on a curb while saying a witty blurb, landed on the street with a very loud thud, and got run over by no less than 30 VW bugs. Lady Death claimed another soul of somebody just taking a stroll.
Here lies Bulbasaur, being dead here on the floor. He ran and played every which way until the very end of his days. You might be wondering the reason why sweet little Bulby had to die. It's because he was old. The end.
And if you're really artistic, in addition to the calaverita, you'll add a little drawing to make it that much better, which brings us to La Catrina. And so in the early 1900s, there was a political cartoonist named Jose Guadalupe Posada, and he wrote a political calaverita. And to accompany his calaverita, he drew a skeleton dressed in a very fancy French outfit. And he was basically making fun of fellow Mexicans who went out of their way to dress and act like Europeans. And he's been credited with the phrase, todos somos calaveras, meaning we're all skeletons. And so no matter how fancy we dress, we are all the same underneath. And in 1947, a different artist named Diego Rivera created a mural, and in the middle of that mural, he put in Posada's calavera. This time he added a really big fancy hat to her, and he called her Katrina. Katrina is apparently a slang term for the rich. Basically, he was emphasizing that even the rich are just skeletons underneath. And thus, La Catrina is pretty much everywhere, not just during Dia de los Muertos. But during the celebrations, skulls come alive everywhere, to include in costumes. Having lots of skull themes everywhere is just a reminder that those who have parted are still with us every day, and especially on Dia de los Muertos. Let's celebrate that. The next thing is Papel Picado, which means pierced paper. These actually really remind me of the snowflakes that we used to make all the time in the US, where you kind of fold paper up and put little holes in it, and then you open it up and it creates a beautiful and unique design all for you. And you'll see these not just during Dia de los Muertos, but kind of all the time. And I didn't realize this, but the symbolism of that, because it's supposed to be made of paper, is it represents the wind and kind of the frailness of life. Of course, a lot of the ones I've been seeing here lately are actually made of plastic, which could be its own sad commentary if you wanted it to be. And so death and life is just a thin sheet of paper away from each other. But again, this is not a sad occasion. It's still colorful and joyful. And so one of the things that surprised me about Dia de los Muertos last year, and it really should not have surprised me, is that, yeah, you can see Dia de los Muertos celebrated in a lot of public places. You can see it celebrated on the streets, in parades, famous in movies, and so you kind of get the impression that it's an everybody thing, but really, it's a very, very personal and private kind of affair. It happens with friends and family. And so it really is like a homecoming or a festive memorial. You really are taking time to celebrate the particular individuals, and that's just not something you can overly commercialize. And so altars can be found in personal homes or near the grave sites, and they're very individual to that family. Each altar and every family's tradition will be different because they're welcoming home a different person. For some families, this year's celebration might be more emotional than for others because perhaps the loss is more recent, perhaps the loss is of a child, or a situation that was just really unexpected. So the celebration can be a little more tearful for some. Again, I go back to that military homecoming concept where, generally speaking, they are joyous affairs, but sometimes as you're celebrating one person coming home, you're also recognizing the risk that was taken and the fact that not everyone does come home. Someone here is gonna hate that I'm comparing it to a military homecoming, but I'm just letting you know the observations I've made. So I mentioned that there are regional differences in how people celebrate Dia de los Muertos, and I thought I would just share with you two such comparisons because I've only been in two cities here in Mexico. And the first is Hanal, which is the Mayan version of Dia de los Muertos over in the Yucatan. Last year I was honored to be invited to a friend's home to celebrate this. I did not take actually any video or photographs because it was just a personal and memorable moment. But now looking back, I feel like I'm better able to talk about it. Here in San Cristobal, I haven't quite figured out how they celebrate Dia de los Muertos yet, so we'll see in a few days. But in a nearby town of San Juan Chamula, their spin is called El Casanto. I am probably really saying that wrong. Please let me know how I can improve my pronunciation of that word. And so one of the main differences between those two is Hanal Pichan is celebrated on October 31st, 1st, and 2nd, with the 31st being to commemorate lost children. And so one of the key differences you might find in an altar, for example, is a lot more color, a lot more toys, a lot more candy, things that are catered more to children than adults. And then on November 1st, where they celebrate the adults, a lot of the coloring becomes much more somber, tablecloths become white, etc. And then November 2nd wraps it up with All Souls Day, helping all the visitors return back to the afterlife. In San Juan Chamula, however, for El Casanto, October 31st is a preparatory day. November 1st is the day when everyone visits, children and adults alike. It's a very family affair, and November 2nd being the return home. Apparently, unless November 2nd falls on a Sunday, in which obviously nobody's making a trip back home, and the holiday gets extended an extra day. I did hear that here in San Cristobal, there might be some trick-or-treating tendencies where local children will go to certain homes and they'll say the phrase, "Calabacita tia," which is apparently asking for pumpkins, but of course what they really want are sweets. So we'll see if that's how it plays out. And I'm told it can happen on the 31st or the 1st of November. So interesting. And so when I say it's a family affair, and it reminds me of kind of a festive memorial service, you know, my mother passed away almost 3 years ago, and while it was a sad and mournful affair, I think there was a lot of healing and closure that happens during the memorial service, during kind of the family get-together that happens afterward. I don't very often see my grandmother, I don't see a lot of my uncles and aunts, my cousins, and while the occasion for the meetup might have been on the sad side, it was really great seeing a lot of my family members be able to make it and sharing stories not just of my amazing mother, but also just life in general, connecting with other family members. And so last year when I participated in Hanal, that was such a strong vibe. Yes, we had an altar, there were marigolds and candles and delicious foods and scents all throughout the house. We had photographs of our loved ones, there was candy, and just like any kind of US family get-togethers, right, the kids kind of go off onto their own, they're playing games, they're watching TV, while the adults are sitting kind of in the living room or the kitchen, and we're just chatting, we're just enjoying each other's company and being really respectful of the fact that in addition to enjoying the life that's around us, this life could not have existed, it could not have been if it wasn't for the fact that our loved ones existed before us, gave us a lot of the amazing perspectives, experiences, and just life that we all have. And if there's one Mexican holiday that I think the US should definitely consider incorporating into our daily lives, it's Dia de los Muertos. Often I feel like in the US, when our loved ones pass, there's the funeral service, memorial services, and then kind of nothing, right? Time goes on, you remember your loved ones, of course they're always in our hearts and mind, but there's really no time where you've got permission, and not even permission, but like an expectation to take a moment and remember. I love that Mexico and the original Mesoamerican cultures took time to celebrate, to remember past friends and family in this beautiful way. It honors their lives and it gives us time to notice the imprints that these amazing people have left in our lives.
My children share a big part of my heart. I didn't know I could love a person so much until I had you. I always thought myself as being self-centered and selfish, but once I had you in my arms, I simply couldn't believe the tiny miracle that was you. I would lie down on the same bed with you and just watch you hour after hour. Every breath you took and every sneeze and every twitch, and especially when you opened your eye and looked at me. It was so special. What a joy that was. And I always carried my children in my arms and not in my back because I love to look at the face of my precious child. You taught me many things too. In a way, we grew up together. I admire you and I love you. I am honored to be your mom. Cut that out, will you? because it's making me cry.